Welcome in, everyone. Before we even really get started today, I just want to take a moment specifically for you. May you have a truly blessed day, and may that divine blessing carry you through your entire week.
Yes, absolutely. It is so incredibly good to have you joining us today.
It really is. And today's deep dive is going to take us back, way, way back into a really fascinating slice of ancient text, which is Exodus chapter 25. And to guide us through this ancient world, we are going to be relying heavily on some incredible in-depth commentary from the Holman and NAA Study Bibles.
It is a truly remarkable piece of literature to examine because if you are just reading through the book of Exodus, chapter 25 can initially feel, well, it feels a bit jarring.
Oh, for sure.
You've just come off this high-stakes cinematic narrative. You've had the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the thunder and lightning on Mount Sinai, and then suddenly the text just shifts gears completely.
Yeah, at first glance, this text reads like a dry, hyper-specific architectural blueprint for a tent and some furniture. You are reading about types of thread, how many rings to cast, the exact placement of loops. Honestly, it sounds like an ancient assembly manual.
It really does.
But I promise you that is absolutely not what this is. It is actually profound, highly symbolic guide to building a mini Eden. It is packed with ancient paradoxes, breathtaking imagery, and some truly divine irony. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the gathering of materials. The text outlines God's command to Moses to gather an offering to build this sanctuary, the Tabernacle. And the list of materials they're supposed to gather is, it's absolutely staggering.
It reads like an inventory of absolute luxury.
It has to be the most exclusive building supply list in the ancient world. They are told to gather gold, silver, and bronze. They need blue, purple, and scarlet yarn alongside fine linen.
Right, and then there is goat hair, red-dyed ram skins, acacia wood, and even exotic leathers.
Exactly. We are talking about materials that are heavy, expensive, and incredibly difficult to process. Which begs a massive question. How in the world did an enslaved nomadic people who are currently wandering through a barren desert acquire such a vast, luxurious hoard of wealth? Where does a wandering tribe get blue, purple, and scarlet yarn?
It is one of the great historical and narrative questions of this text, and the commentary provides a very clear, historically grounded answer. This wealth was essentially the spoils of Egypt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the historical context here is crucial to understanding the sheer volume of what is being offered. When the Israelites were finally liberated, the biblical narrative tells us that they didn't flee empty-handed. The Egyptians, who were completely broken and desperate for them to leave after the plagues, practically threw their wealth at the Israelites.
Wow.
They gave them silver, gold, and incredibly expensive clothing. So this staggering wealth they are now being asked to contribute is the very wealth they carried out of their captivity in the Egyptian empire.
That paints such a vivid, almost surreal picture. These newly freed people, who have been slaves making mud bricks their entire lives, are currently wandering the desert, carrying the amassed riches of the empire that oppressed them.
It's a profound reversal of fortunes.
Definitely. But there is a very specific role attached to this gathering of materials. This isn't a mandatory tax. God didn't demand a flat rate from every single family. This was strictly a voluntary offering. The text explicitly says God only wanted materials from those whose hearts moved them.
The source material places a massive emphasis on that specific phrasing. This was not a compulsory tribute extracted through public pressure or, divine threat. It was an offering of the heart.
A completely free choice.
Right. And the sheer volume of materials they eventually gathered, so much so that later in the narrative, Moses actually has to tell the people to stop giving it, shows how deeply their hearts were moved by this project. The psychological shift from being forced laborers to joyful, voluntary contributors is a massive theme here.
That is beautiful.
Which brings us to the ultimate purpose of all this crowdfunding. The goal wasn't just to build a beautiful tent to show off their newly acquired wealth. The core mission is found in God's instruction. Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them.
That I may dwell among them. That really is the beating heart of this entire architectural endeavor, isn't it?
It is the absolute theological center of the text. In Hebrew, this concept of God dwelling is deeply connected to the idea of the Shekinah, the manifest, localized divine presence of God. The creator of the universe is seeking a specific zip code in the middle of a desert camp.
A zip code in the desert. I love that.
And the study notes make a fascinating connection here to the New Testament, specifically looking at the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14. That verse talks about how the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. In the original Greek, that word for dwelt literally means to pitch a tent or to tabernacle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the tabernacle in Exodus is the physical, historical precursor to that ultimate desire of the divine to be intimately physically present with humanity.
It's incredible. The creator of the universe essentially wants to go camping with his people. He wants to be in the dirt and the dust with them. But while all this beautiful, highly elevated theology is being handed down on the mountain, there is a massive, almost tragic narrative irony happening that the study Bibles point out.
Yes, the timing here is critical.
Let's talk about the timing of these blueprints. While Moses is up on the mountain, enveloped in the glory of God, receiving these meticulous instructions for pure worship and a place for God to dwell, what is happening down in the valley?
The Israelites are about to utterly and spectacularly fail.
Yeah.
While Moses is receiving the blueprint for the tabernacle, the people below are growing impatient. They feel abandoned. And in that impatience, they are gathering their Egyptian gold and preparing to build the golden calf.
It is wild to think about that juxtaposition. At the exact moment the blueprints for the ultimate sacred space are being gifted to humanity at the summit. Humanity is busy at the base of the mountain, building an idol out of the very same gold they were supposed to use for the sanctuary.
It's a profound commentary on the human condition.
It really is. It shows our desperate need for the divine, combined with our absolute inability to wait for it on God's terms. But despite that failure, the instructions stand. The grace of the blueprint remains. Let's move into the actual design, starting with the very first and easily the most sacred piece of furniture they're commanded to build, the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes, the architectural instructions begin from the inside out. They start in the most holy place with the most holy object and work their way outward.
So what are we actually looking at here? Because when we hear Ark of the Covenant, thanks to Hollywood, we often picture this massive, glowing weapon of destruction. Is this a giant monument?
Not at all. The sources provide the exact metric dimensions to help ground our imagination. The ark was essentially a rectangular chest about 1.101 meters long and 0.66 meters wide and high.
Okay, so it is not massive.
No, it is roughly the size of a large cedar chest or a travel trunk. But the construction is what sets it apart. It was to be made of acacia wood, which is a very dense, incredibly durable desert wood resistant to decay, and then it was to be completely overlaid with pure gold, both inside and out.
And we can't overlook the mobility of it. The text gives a very specific instruction about the carrying poles. I read that these poles, also made of acacia wood and overlaid with gold, were to be inserted into 4 golden rings cast on the corners of the ark. But the crucial detail is that once those poles were inserted, they were never, ever to be removed. Why is that detail so important?
Because they were a nomadic people, and the presence of God was journeying with them. The permanently inserted poles signify that the ark had to be ready to move at a moment's notice. It wasn't a static shrine fixed to a specific geographic location.
It was always ready to go.
Exactly. As for what was actually kept inside this golden repository, the primary contents were the testimony, the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments given to Moses. The commentary also references Hebrews 9.4, which notes that later on in their history, a golden jar of manna and Aaron's staff that had budded were also kept inside.
So it served as a physical, portable vault of their ongoing history with the divine.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The box itself is amazing, an incredible piece of craftsmanship. But the lid of this box is where the true theological weight rests. We generally know it in English as the mercy seat. Now, I have seen some Latin-based study notes translate this term as the propitiatorio. Can you clarify what that means in this context?
Absolutely. The mercy seat is vital to understanding the entire sacrificial system of the tabernacle. The Hebrew word used here is kapareh, which is closely related to the concept of making expiation, covering, or atonement. When translations use a word like propitiatorio, they are trying to capture that active function of propitiation, the turning away of wrath through an offering. This wasn't just a decorative golden lid designed to keep the desert sand off the Ten Commandments. It was a highly functional, deeply sacred space.
So it had a very specific practical use in their worship.
Right. The study Bibles explain that on the annual Day of Atonement, the high priest would take blood and sprinkle it on this exact cover to make provision for the sins of the entire nation. It was the physical, geographic location where the broken law, which is literally represented by the stone tablets inside the box, was covered by divine mercy.
The imagery there is so incredibly rich. And the physical design of this mercy seat is stunning. It was made of one solid piece of hammered pure gold. And rising out of the ends of this solid gold slab were 2 cherubims. These are angelic, winged figures. The text describes them as having their wings spread upward, overshadowing the mercy seat, and they are facing each other, with their faces looking down toward the cover in a posture of reverence.
What's fascinating here is what happens in the empty space between those two golden cherubim.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that empty space.
That negative space, the void above the blood-sprinkled mercy seat, served as the earthly, invisible throne of God. The text explicitly says this empty space is the exact spot where God's voice would meet with Moses.
An invisible throne. I mean, in a world where every single surrounding nation had these massive physical statues of their gods sitting on literal, tangible thrones, Israel's God sits on empty space. He cannot be contained, he cannot be sculpted, and he cannot be manipulated by human hands. It is such a powerful, radical contrast to the culture of the ancient Near East.
It was completely countercultural.
Okay, so we have this invisible throne in the most holy place. But a royal throne room doesn't just have a throne, right? If we move out into the next room, we find a table. Let's talk about the table of showbread. How big was this piece? Are we talking about a massive banquet table?
Not quite a banquet table, but a very specific piece of furniture. It was also made of acacia wood overlaid with gold. The dimensions here are roughly 0.88 meters long, 0.44 meters wide, and 0.66 meters high.
Pretty compact.
Yes, and it wasn't just a bare table. The instructions include making pure gold plates, dishes, and pitchers to be used for drink offerings or libations.
And upon this table sat the bread of the presence, or the showbread. This is where the commentary highlights a crucial cultural contrast that you really need to understand to grasp what is happening here. Why bread? In the ancient Near East, pagan temples routinely left food out on tables. But they did this because they believed their gods physically needed to eat.
That was the pervasive worldview.
They actually thought the gods required human sustenance to survive, to be appeased, and to perform their divine duties.
Exactly. The gods were hungry, and humans were created to feed them. But the setup in the tabernacle completely subverts and rejects that idea. The 12 loaves of bread placed on this table, which represented the 12 tribes of Israel, were not there to feed a hungry God. Instead, they were a symbolic, perpetual provision from God to the people.
Wait, if the food is a provision from God, why put it on a physical table in the tent at all? Who is actually eating this bread?
The Israelite priests ate it. The food was never consumed by the divine. Every Sabbath, fresh bread was laid out, and the priest would eat the bread from the previous week.
That makes so much sense.
It was a tangible weekly reminder that God is the ultimate source of all life, all sustenance, and all provision for his people. It completely flips the ancient script. God doesn't need humanity to keep him alive. Humanity needs God to keep them alive.
That is a profound theological shift for that era. And speaking of life and sustenance, right across from that table is perhaps the most visually stunning complex item in the entire tabernacle, the menorah, or the golden lampstand. Let's talk about the lighting in this tent.
The level of craftsmanship required for this single piece is honestly staggering to think about.
Staggering is the perfect word for it. The text says it was crafted from a single talent of pure hammered gold. For context, a talent is incredibly heavy, roughly 75 pounds of gold.
And from this single, solid piece, not poured into a mold, but hammered out by hand, they had to form a central shaft with 6 branches extending from it, 3 on each side, holding a total of 7 lamps.
The sheer logistics of hammering out 75 pounds of gold into a perfectly symmetrical multi-branch structure without it snapping or warping is mind-blowing. But beyond the engineering, it's the design details that really catch your eye. It wasn't just smooth industrial gold pipes.
No, the entire structure was heavily imbued with botanical symbolism.
Yes, the text specifies a highly detailed, incredibly specific floral design. The cups holding the oil were to be shaped like almond blossoms, complete with intricate buds and flowers. So you have this massive, glowing golden tree sitting in the middle of a fabric tent, reflecting light off the golden walls. But why an almond tree specifically? Out of all the plants in the Middle East, why that one?
The study Bibles provide a wonderful, deeply culturally rooted insight into this choice. In the Middle East, the almond tree is one of the very first trees to bloom in the spring.
Like an early riser.
Exactly. It often wakes up and blossoms while it is still technically winter, long before the other trees show signs of life. Because it blooms so early, it became a biblical symbol of vigilance, of wakefulness, and of being the first to act. The commentary points directly to the prophet Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 11 and 12.
What does that passage say?
In that passage, there is a brilliant play on words in the original Hebrew, between the word for almond branch and the concept of watching. The golden almond tree burning in the tabernacle represents God's constant, unending vigilance. It is a brilliant, glowing symbol that God is always awake, He is always watching over His word to fulfill it, and He is endlessly watching over His people.
Wow. That glowing golden tree represents a God who never slumbers and never sleeps. That imagery is incredibly powerful, and it actually transitions us perfectly into the grand, overarching theme of this entire deep dive. When you step back and look at all these pieces together, a clear picture emerges.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, all of these hyper-specific details, the sheer abundance of gold, the incorruptible acacia wood, the winged cherubim, the blooming almond blossoms, they aren't just random, disjointed interior design choices. The tabernacle wasn't just a fancy tent for conducting religious rituals, it was meticulously designed, straight from the mind of God, to function as a mini Eden.
A mini Eden. We know that you are likely familiar with the early chapters of Genesis, so we immediately see the echoes of Genesis 3 here. Let's really walk through these striking architectural parallels, because once you see the connection between the garden and the tabernacle, you literally cannot unsee it.
It starts at the very entrance, with the guards. After the fall of humanity, Adam and Eve are exiled from the Garden of Eden, which was the original sanctuary, the original place where God dwelled openly with humanity. And what does God place at the eastern entrance of Eden to guard the sacred space and protect the way to the tree of life?
Cherubim.
Cherubim. And here in the tabernacle, what do we see? We see cherubim woven intricately into the inner curtains, and of course, the massive hammered gold cherubim guarding the mercy seat on the ark. You have to pass beneath and between the cherubim to re-enter the presence of God. Furthermore, the creation account in Genesis specifically mentions the abundance of good gold in the lands surrounding Eden. Here in the tabernacle, you have a sacred space utterly defined by the staggering abundance of pure gold.
And then, of course, there's the menorah we just discussed, the golden lampstand.
Exactly. Placed in the holy place, providing the only light to the inner sanctuary, it serves as a brilliant, glowing botanical symbol of the tree of life. You literally have a botanical tree of light standing before the presence of God, just as the tree of life stood in the center of the garden. The entire architectural, artistic, and spatial layout of the tabernacle is meant to signal a profound restoration.
It's a pathway back.
Yes, it is a pathway back to paradise. It is a temporary, portable way for humanity to experience a taste of the lost intimacy of Eden while they wander through a broken world.
So what does this all mean? Why spend an entire deep dive talking about the exact metric dimensions, the types of thread, and the furniture layout of an ancient tent? Because this text represents something so deeply human and so deeply divine. It represents humanity's innate, desperate desire to bridge the gap between heaven and earth.
Beautifully said.
And more importantly, it represents a creator who doesn't just want to shout intimidating commands from the top of a smoky, terrifying mountain. This is a God who wants to dwell intimately with his people. He provides a highly structured, incredibly symbolic, and distinctly portable format so that he could literally camp out with them. He moved as they moved. He stopped when they stopped, and he suffered the heat of the wilderness right alongside them.
This raises an important question, though. When we look at these ancient blueprints, the ultimate goal was simply to create a space for the divine to dwell in the midst of the people. It was a profoundly communal reality. It challenged the Israelites to center their entire camp, the physical layout of their daily lives, around this shared sacred space.
Right. Every tribe camped in relation to the tabernacle.
Exactly. So how does that ancient blueprint challenge our modern concepts of sacred space? Today, our spirituality is often highly individualized, isolated, and incredibly private. We tend to look for God in our own personal time, in our own private ways, separated from the community. What do we lose when we forget the ancient reality that the divine deeply desires to dwell in the messy, chaotic, shared center of the community?
That is a brilliant and challenging question to leave you with today. Where's the sacred space in the middle of your community? Are you building it together, or are you trying to build it alone? Thank you so much for joining us and exploring this text with us. God blesses all the listeners.